The Ultimate Bible Guide, 66 books, one amazing story, a complete journey from Genesis to Revelation. Have you ever felt completely lost trying to understand how the Bible fits together? You're reading Genesis about Adam and Eve, then suddenly you're in Exodus with Moses and the plagues. Then jumping to Leviticus with all those confusing laws about sacrifices. It's like trying to watch a Marvel movie saga completely out of order and wondering how all these characters and storylines connect. Well, here's something that's going to absolutely blow your mind today. The Bible isn't just a random collection of 66 different books written by various authors across thousands of years. It's actually one incredibly sophisticated, interconnected story. Think of it like the greatest Netflix series ever created, with 66 episodes that all build toward one epic finale. In the next hour, you're going to discover something that will completely transform how you read and understand Scripture. You'll see how every single book, from the very first verse in Genesis to the final prayer in Revelation, is part of God's master plan to rescue humanity. By the end of this video, you'll never look at the Bible the same way again. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's dive into the most incredible story ever told. Chapter 1: The Perfect Beginning and the Great Disaster. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. These aren't just nice opening words. This is the declaration that everything you're about to read in the next 65 books is a God-centered story from start to finish. Genesis sets up three foundational truths that echo throughout the entire Bible. First, perfect creation. When God finished creating everything, He looked at it and said it was very good. There was perfect harmony between God and humanity, between people and nature, and between human beings themselves. It was like living in the most beautiful national park you can imagine, except there were no entrance fees, no crowds, and no pollution. Second, the Great Rebellion. But then humanity chose to disobey God by eating from the forbidden tree. This wasn't just about breaking a rule. It was like a child telling their loving parent, "I don't trust you, and I'm going to do things my way." Sin entered the world, and every relationship got broken. Suddenly, people were hiding from God, blaming each other, and the whole creation started groaning under the weight of this cosmic rebellion. Third, the first promise of rescue. But here's where it gets amazing. Right there in Genesis chapter 3 verse 15, God makes the first promise that someone from the woman's offspring would defeat the serpent. This is like the first movie trailer for Jesus Christ, shown thousands of years before he would actually arrive. The story continues with Noah and the ark, where we see that even in judgment, God provides a way of salvation. Then there's the Tower of Babel, where humans try to make a name for themselves without God, showing us that pride and self-reliance always lead to confusion and division. But then we get to Abraham, and this is where God's rescue plan really starts to take shape. God calls this man out of paganism and makes him an incredible promise in Genesis chapter 12 verse 3. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. This isn't just about one family or one nation. This is God's plan to bless the entire world through Abraham's descendant, who we later discover is Jesus Christ. The stories of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph all show us how God works behind the scenes, even using terrible circumstances like betrayal and slavery to accomplish his good purposes. When Joseph tells his brothers in Genesis chapter 50 verse 20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good," he's showing us a principle that runs through the entire Bible. Genesis is like the opening credits of the greatest movie ever made. It introduces all the main themes, creation and fall, judgment and salvation, that will play out across the next 65 books. Chapter 2: Freedom and Learning How to Live. After 400 years of slavery in Egypt, the Israelites were crying out to God. And Exodus chapter 2 verse 24 tells us that God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The exodus from Egypt wasn't just an ancient refugee crisis. It was God personally intervening in history to save his people. The 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the pillar of fire by night and cloud by day, all of this was God saying, "I am real, I am powerful, and I keep my promises." When they got to Mount Sinai, God gave them the 10 Commandments and the law. This wasn't God being a cosmic killjoy, laying down arbitrary rules. This was like a loving father teaching his children how to live safely and happily. The law showed them what it looks like to love God and love your neighbor. Leviticus gets into all the details about sacrifices and ceremonies. I know it seems tedious to modern readers, but here's what's amazing. Every single sacrifice was pointing forward to Jesus. Every time blood was shed for sin, it was like a preview of the cross. Every time a priest entered the Holy of Holies, it was pointing to Jesus becoming our ultimate high priest. But then we get to Numbers, and it's honestly heartbreaking. Despite seeing miracle after miracle, the Israelites kept complaining and rebelling. When they got to the border of the Promised Land and sent out spies, 10 came back, saying, "The giants are too big. We can't do this." Only Joshua and Caleb said, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" Because of their fear and unbelief, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Deuteronomy is Moses giving a final pep talk to the new generation before they enter the Promised Land. The heart of the law is found in Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 5, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength." Jesus would later call this the greatest commandment. Chapter 3 Conquering and Settling. Under Joshua's leadership, the Israelites finally crossed the Jordan River and began conquering the Promised Land. The Battle of Jericho shows us God's unusual battle strategy. No battering rams, no siege weapons, just walking around the city and trusting God. When the walls came tumbling down, it was clear that this victory belonged to God, not human military might. But after Joshua died, things went downhill fast. The book of Judges shows us one of the darkest periods in Israel's history. Judges chapter 21 verse 25 sums it up perfectly. In those days Israel had no king, everyone did as they saw fit. It was like the Wild West, except worse. The pattern in Judges is depressingly predictable. The people would fall into sin, get oppressed by their enemies, cry out to God, and then God would raise up a judge to deliver them. But as soon as the judge died, they'd fall back into the same patterns. God raised up leaders like Deborah, Gideon, and Samson, but the cycle of rebellion continued. In the middle of this dark period, the book of Ruth shines like a beacon of hope. Ruth, a foreigner from Moab, chooses to follow her Jewish mother-in-law Naomi back to Bethlehem. Her famous declaration, "Where you go I will go, and where you stay I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God my God," shows us that God's love crosses all ethnic and national boundaries. Even more amazing, Ruth becomes the great-grandmother of King David, putting her in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Chapter 4 Kings, Glory, and Tragic Decline. When the people demanded a king like the other nations, God told Samuel, "They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me as their king." God gave them what they wanted, but it came with consequences. King Saul started well but ended tragically because he cared more about what people thought than what God thought. But then came David, who was called a man after God's own heart. This wasn't because David was perfect. In fact, he committed adultery with Bathsheba and had her husband killed. But when confronted with his sin, David wrote Psalm chapter 51, one of the most beautiful prayers of repentance in the Bible. "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart you, God, will not despise." God made an incredible promise to David in 2 Samuel chapter 7. He promised that one of David's descendants would establish an eternal kingdom. This is another major preview of Jesus Christ, who would be called the Son of David and whose kingdom would have no end. Solomon's reign was Israel's golden age. He built the magnificent temple, and his wisdom was legendary. People came from all over the world just to hear him speak. But success went to his head. He married foreign wives who led him into idol worship, and his excessive taxes and forced labor programs created resentment among the people. After Solomon died, the kingdom split in two. The northern kingdom of Israel immediately fell into idol worship and never had a single good king. They were eventually conquered by Assyria and scattered. The southern kingdom of Judah had some good kings like Hezekiah and Josiah who brought spiritual renewal, but the overall trend was downward. Eventually, they too were conquered and carried off to Babylon. The books of Chronicles retell this same history but focus more on the spiritual lessons. They show us that when nations and individuals put God first, they prosper. When they turn away from God, they face consequences. Chapter 5 The Human Heart Laid Bare. The 5 books from Job to Song of Songs dive deep into the human experience and show us how to relate to God in every situation. Job asks the ultimate question that everyone faces sooner or later. Why do good people suffer? Job's friends kept insisting that his suffering must be punishment for some secret sin, but they were wrong. When God finally speaks in Job chapter 38, he doesn't explain why Job suffered. Instead, he reminds Job of his sovereignty and wisdom. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Sometimes we don't get answers to our why questions, but we can trust in who God is. The Psalms are like the soundtrack of the Bible. David and the other psalm writers held nothing back from God. They expressed joy and sorrow, praise and complaint, confidence and doubt. Psalm chapter 23 verse 4 says, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." This isn't naive optimism, it's faith that chooses to trust God even in the worst circumstances. Proverbs is like a guidebook for practical living. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. This doesn't mean being terrified of God, but having such respect and reverence for Him that it shapes every decision we make. Proverbs covers everything from managing money to choosing friends to controlling your temper. Ecclesiastes is brutally honest about life's frustrations. Meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless, but the conclusion is profound. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. Life without God really is meaningless, but life with God has eternal significance. Song of Songs celebrates human love and marriage as a reflection of God's love for His people. It reminds us that God created us as physical and emotional beings, and He delights in the love between a husband and wife.